Everybody, I'll just give everyone a minute or so just to join us. Not quite at the end yet. A few more seconds. Oh, we're still going up. Okay, well, hello everybody, and thank you for joining our modern day fairy tale of Hull Teaching Hospital's journey to asset visibility and how it has created happy ever afters for its staff. So, like any great story, there have been adventures along the way, which we're looking forward to sharing with you today. And I have here our lead storyteller, Rachel Ellis, who is Scan for Safety Programme Director at Hull, and she drove the pioneering asset tracking solution. Plus, we have video inputs from the wonderful clinician team who will share their daily benefits that they're experiencing. And we have a guest appearance from the fabulous Glenn Hodgson, Head of Healthcare at GS1, to share the story of the barcode. So we are in listen-only mode, but please do put your questions into the question box and we'll go through these at the end. And I have a few prepped just in case anybody's feeling shy. This is being recorded and I will share it after the event. The link that you use to registration will be accessible for that recorded version. So with that, I will pass over to wonderful Rachel Ellis.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us on this webinar. Thanks to Glenn and to Lorna and Zebra for facilitating. So I'm going to talk to you about basically our story, our fairy tale of how we looked at increased efficiency and improved our patient care. And next slide, please, Lorna. So we're going to do this in the form of a fairy tale. We've got 6 chapters. I'm going to talk you through those. Obviously, you know, I have to say these words, but are you sitting comfortably? Then I will begin. So chapter 1 is all about once upon a time in a land far, far away. Chapter 2 is all about the good characters, our heroes of the story, who absolutely bring this to life. This programme is complex. It has lots of great characters that supported, and we'll talk through those. Then chapter 3, we're going to come on to sort of building our magical hospital full of hopes and dreams and what our expectations look like and what we did, how it all works. Glenn's going to give a piece about how GS1 supports that and healthcare comes into its own within the GS1 barcodes. And I will be mentioning barcodes throughout this, but Glenn will be specifically looking at those. Chapter 4 is oh no, we've got treachery on the scale of a product recall, on a really big scale that we had one of our biggest recalls that we've ever seen. Chapter 5 is our dreams of improvement, about what we actually want. And then chapter 6 is our happy ever after. So next slide, please. So once upon a time in a land far, far away, when I presented this at HIMSS, we were 3,894 miles away. So a very long way away from Hull University Teaching Hospital. That picture that you're looking at there is Hull Royal. We have 2 sites and we're going to come on to that on the next video, please, Lorna. Great, thank you. And the frog relates to when Hull was the city of culture, and the site is that big. It is genuinely like a small hospital, you know, kind of a small hospital, rather, a small city within the hospital itself. So the year of culture, there was 30 frogs placed in and around the city, and the hospital actually got its own frog. So so we were very distinguished within the local community. So yeah, this is where we are on the map. I know that a lot of you are joining us from overseas. So we're on the east coast of Britain. Everybody always asks me, we're about 4 hours drive from London. So we're quite a way away. And we are a really big hospital. So next slide, please, if I can. Thanks, Lorna. So this is a shot of our helipad on one of the sites. We've got 3 sites. We've got 2 patient-facing sites. We've got 1 very big inner city site. And then we've got 1 much more rural, low-scaped buildings, you know, out at Castle Hill. And then we also have a sterile services processing plant. We've got over 11,000 staff. We treat almost you know, just over 1 million patients it is, but we actually admit over 90,000 to the wards. And because we're on the east coast where all of the oil rigs are and the North Sea is, we also have decompression chambers, and we're the major trauma centre for the region. So anything which is, if we get an explosion, if we get a major traffic accident, if we get anything of a building collapse or anything like that, they will all come to Hull. So we are a very big hospital with a very big breadth, and we cover all of the specialties. Next slide, please. Thank you. So yeah, when we first started, this was our, what do we want? What does success look like? And that's always a really tough question, actually. And I took my guidance from a lot of clinicians who, one of them in particular said, who was the clinical lead for cardiology, said, well, we run 5 theatres and I don't know what's going on with my other clinical colleagues in the other 4 theatres. If I'm in theatre on Tuesday, you know, if they were doing a coronary artery bypass graft, then they don't know what the other theatres are running, what they're costing, how long they're taking, if it's comparable. So they wanted to understand what that looked like. We also wanted to understand about tracking products to patients. That was really important. Everything before that had been paper done. We wanted to understand where our assets were going. We also wanted to be able to see the reports and have patient level costing. And we needed digital records. We were being asked by NHS England on a regular basis to implement various mandated policies and regulations for being able to report on things, and we wanted to do that. And so we looked at various ways to do it, but that was our ultimate goal, was to have all those things that you're looking at on that screen right there. But a lot of it was about digitizing. We were making manual records, to be very clear here, but we didn't, it's very difficult to pull manual records in a matter of seconds. You know, when you've got to pull back a patient's records, you've got to wade through a lot of notes. So it just made it a lot simpler if we were going to do that. Next slide, please. So yeah, we started from nothing, and we researched and we reviewed and we recognised, and then we reached some conclusions, and I visited all of the 6 demo sites, and we will come on to those quite shortly. But ultimately, on the top left of this screen, you can see implant books, and for those that don't understand what they are, when we have patients, so today in orthopedics, probably we will have fit 4 hips to a theatre listing on an all-day list. So for 4 hips, we will have 4 patient stickers, 4 dates, 4 times, who was the lead surgeon, and then previous to Scan for Safety going live, we'd have took all the stickers off the boxes and stuck them against that patient, which is great, and we've got the record. But how do you then find a lot on a batch number when you are given 3 boxes that look like that on the picture? The answer is with a lot of time. You can do it, but it takes a lot of time. So we recognised early on what we wanted to do. We wanted to kind of be able to punch details into the screen and get those results back. So we started with no systems apart from manual ones, and obviously stock that looked a bit like that middle picture, things just crammed in boxes, because what difference did it make? We'll find it anyway, because we had no stock control systems either. Next slide, please. So chapter 2, let's meet our good characters. So in order to be able to do this at Hull, I had to convince and compel my exec board, and my senior responsible officer has been exemplary to actually endorsing this program, funding this program, and genuinely believing it's the right thing to do. And that has continued since I've been in post. NHS England have provided 6 what we call demonstrator sites. So they've given them some funding, and they'd effectively wrote a rule book and said, this is how to do Scan for Safety. This is how we start to automate a lot of these manual processes. And I went to visit all of those sites, and I'll come on to that in a little bit. GS1, obviously for standards, so that we can share data, we can share it with our supply chains, we can share it with other staff members, but we can also share it to other systems because they recognise that as being, so for example, when we look at a GTIN, which is a global trade identification number, each product has its own barcode, which effectively is a GTIN. And for those elements of it, it means that then we can share it, and we can share it quickly. So if York ring and we have 3 variants of something, one in a size at 8mm, 10mm and a 12mm, York is our neighbouring hospital about an hour away, and occasionally they will ring us and say, have you got this piece of kit? And if we've got that product and they need it in an 8mm, that will have a different GTIN to the 10 and the 12mm. So we can look up really quickly rather than going to back to those boxes trying to hunt through things. We can tap it on the screen and see what we've got. So great news. This was followed by a report by Baroness Cumberledge, which was called First Do No Harm, which focuses on 3 parts really for public harm as a public inquiry written up in the UK. And this just endorsed the fact that actually, if you don't have any traceability, then actually all that you've got is you've got yourself a set of paper records which have no benefit really to anybody else, because it's very difficult to extract the data. We also had clinicians and our Scan for Safety champions who got the vision, who understand what I was trying to do, and our clinicians supported on the way. So again, next slide, please. So this is Sally, and Sally is our matron that runs cardiothoracic, so heart and lung theatre, and she's going to talk a little bit more about our collaboration with her on the next video, please, Lorna.
We're a big trust. We've got 2 main sites. We've got Hull Royal Infirmary and Castle Hill. Hull Royal's the acute site, and we are mainly elective surgery here at Castle Hill. Surgery-wise, we cover a lot of specialities. We do general theatres, orthopaedics, cardiothoracic, neuro, vascular, robotic surgery here. We're the only hospital in the country with a dedicated robotic theatre department. I'm now trying to think, we've got plastics, gynae, urology. I'm not trying to think of all the specialities I might have forgotten to say, but yeah, we cover a wide range here. So yeah, when we were first told about the project, we didn't feel great about it. It felt like more work, a new system, something else for us to add into our day that we didn't really feel like we needed at that time. But once it was in and we were comfortable with it, it's really helped. It just made things smoother and quicker. It's helped with our budgeting, it's helped with our stock levels. So now I can't imagine not having it.
So that was the message from Sally there about not having it, and it's a convincing and compelling piece that you have to do with clinicians, and one of the things that I'm widely known for saying is you have to solve their problems. And Sally's issue was that she didn't understand how she was spending all her budgets, which were significant, and she comes back to us in a little bit throughout the presentation. So we'll see that. And chapter 3 then. So this is one of our main thoroughfares. This were actually taken at night. Because otherwise there'd be a lot more people in it. But basically, when we first started, I visited all the demo sites, and I liked something at every single demonstrator site. So throughout England, there were 6 that were small, large, some that were really quite tiny, some that did pretty much everything. You've got Leeds Hospital that are huge and are well renowned globally for lots of different things, right through to sort of really small district generals that were given money, almost like a village hospital. So we had a real sort of plethora of the whole range to actually look at, and then everybody within England could go, well, my hospital is like this, let's have a look at how they've implemented. So when I'd been there, one of the things that I did recognise was that a lot of them were going down what I would call the theatre corridor. And for me, I have no problem with this at all. I think wherever you start is a good thing. But for me, it doesn't give the entire patient pathway, and as half of all mistakes, roughly about 48% to 52%, happen outside of theatre, you know, in terms of clinical errors and etc. Actually, it felt wrong for me to limit the programme just to be contained within theatres. So I produced a new methodology called the 3 Cs. And we basically follow a patient pathway. So we're going to look at a patient pathway in a second and you will see that. But basically, if it was connected to the patient, if it was continuous to the patient, and if it completed the patient's pathway, then it was in scope. And that's how we did it. So next slide, please. Thank you. So this is the patient pathway that our very first implementation went live with. And it went live with all of this in 8 weeks. So when we first started, within 8 weeks, all of these areas were live. So we started looking at the pathway for cardiac surgery, mainly because it was where we held over £1 million worth of stock of heart valves. And also because we have very little control over that stock and also over the reporting of it. So we looked at cardiac surgery. So the pathway was, we needed to understand what the anaesthetic part looked like, and that's all scanned. And all of these areas, these bubbles that you see on the screen, are scanned against the 4 Ps. So they're scanned against the patient, the product, the place, and the process. So within anaesthetics, it will say, this is the chief anaesthetist that's done this, this is the patient, these are the products that are used, and they were in this anaesthetist suite. And then within cardiac surgery, it will do the same. It's this patient, which will be the same patient ID. It will have been these products, which will be completely different to anaesthetics. It will be within this theatre. And this is what we are doing. So if it's a coronary artery bypass graft, or if it's a mitral valve replacement, then that will show. And then all the products are scanned through, including all the sterile trays. So we have full visibility to all the sterile trays, so that if we did ever have a recall for CJD at some point in the future, then we can again tap it as if it was just a normal product and bring that back. When patients have, sorry, just back 1 second, sorry, Lorna. If you can. Thank you. Sorry. So when patients have cardiac surgery done, a lot of them go on what's known as cardiac bypass. So this also happened in perfusion. And then we don't go to recovery for cardiac patients because of the nature of the surgery. It's long, it's intensive, and they go straight to an ICU bed, an intensive care bed. And then from there, once the patient's discharged. So that's the pathway. And within that, then we have 5 entries for that patient pathway to come all the way through. Thank you. Cheers, Lorna. And this is a question I'm asked a lot. So why do you do the patient pathway? Okay, so there's lots of reasons. If I don't do the patient pathway, I don't get a full list of costs. If I don't do the patient pathway, I don't understand which staff members treated the patient. So if I don't do it and the anaesthetist contracts TB tonight on a patient that had surgery today, actually then I have to start going back to manual records to understand what was the anaesthetist, where was he, who was the staff members. Whereas if all of those have been scanned, it's a click of a button and I can pull everybody back. So why would I not, is my question here. When I get asked why, I always say, why would you not? Why would you not follow that patient pathway? If the patient's really important to you, put them in the middle, put them in the centre of the programme and centre the programme around them. So that's what we did. Next slide, please. So let's hear what makes a difference when we are scanning. This is 2 of our cardiac teams, and you are looking at heart valves and some other products that are being used for surgery there with Sarah and with John. If we go on to the next slide, there's a little video.
Now that staff are used to using it, they are more aware of what we're using. I think we have less stock wastage because you have to physically scan the item. It's making them think, well, we're using this thing, whereas before they might have opened, I don't know, 5 packs of swabs thinking, well, we'll need them, but now they're thinking, hang on, these have got a cost assigned to these. So I think it's made financially, it's made staff more aware. And also they very much have taken ownership of, oh, well, we need to reorder the item because we've used it. If it's something that doesn't flag up automatically. So it's definitely made staff more aware of what we use and why we use it, and of being aware of general stock levels. So it's definitely helped them, it's empowered them as well. We've got over 9,000 different products in cardiac alone. So to get those on the system, was a huge job. But it became apparent fairly quickly that we were holding stock and amounts of stock that we just didn't need to hold that much. You know, I think if there was an empty shelf in the storeroom, we filled it because there was a gap for that certain item, so it went in. So it made us realise, and being able to easily look and track, okay, we've only used, you know, 3 of those this year, why are we holding 20 of them? So it became, you know, very easy to see what we were holding that we didn't need to hold, or even the other way, that actually we're constantly chasing this item, so we need to increase the amount. And, you know, looking at the heart valves, we were holding over £1 million worth of heart valves in our cupboard, and for the same thing, you know, some of them we only used a few a year, but we were holding several of them. So we managed to scale that down to now we hold £600,000 worth, you know, so that's £400,000 just saved instantly.
Okay, so we're going to have a slight change of gears now. So thank you very much for that start to the webinar, Rachel. We're going to have a quick section now from Glenn Hodgson about the origins and the growth of the barcode. Over to you, Glenn.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Lorna. So let's move on. In the spirit of fairy tales, let's move to the next slide, please. I've chosen a tale of oldest time, and so clearly in this part, Rachel is the beauty and I'm the beast. We started off there with a quick photo of price guns, and a chap here that you can see called Norman Woodland on a beach in 1948 came up with the idea of barcodes, and very quickly we moved forward to Ohio, Marsh's supermarkets in 1974, Melrose supermarkets in, I think it's Spalding in Lincolnshire in 1979 was the first product scanned in the UK. And things went wonderful. And then 2013, you saw very quickly there a brief picture of some newspapers. And in 2013, there was this thing called the horse meat scandal. So in some Findus products, instead of there being beef, it was horse meat. Nutritionally, it's probably no worse. It may even be better for you, but us Brits didn't like that. And it took about 10 minutes for Tesco's to just put a hold, stop selling it and issuing a recall. And indeed, even in that time, had you put something, you know, from the freezer cabinet into your shopping basket or shopping trolley, by the time you got to till, it said, no, I'm not going to sell you this. And I just want to compare that to what was going on in healthcare. Products have been actually barcoded in healthcare since around probably the turn of the century, and more used greatly for unique device identification, so serialization from about 2010 onwards. But in 2010, let's look at this picture on the front there. This is PIP, it's a French company, and their breast implants. And breast implants use medical grade silicone, and this was proven by a court case of fraud. And instead of having medical grade silicone, they put industrial grade silicone, and they started to leak. And that's not very good if you've got them inside you. These were manufactured, funnily enough, around about 2010, 2012. There seemed to be some problems. By 2014, there was a massive recall. 10 years later, today, in this country alone, the MHRA, the Medical Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, estimates there are around 29,000 to 32,000 women that still have these implants inside their body, because we can't trace them. The picture on the right is really interesting. Somebody at one stage thought it was a great idea to have artificial hips made from metal. And what you have there is a metal ball and a metal joint. And it took a few years before people realized, well, actually, if you've got metal and metal, you can actually start having fine scrapings and fine metal filings going into the bloodstream, which is carcinogenic. So we decided to do recalls on these things. And as Rachel alluded to earlier, that meant going into procedure books, looking for those stickers Rachel talked about, across thousands of operations, across hundreds of operating theatres. And in the meantime, while we were looking for this, while the NHS was looking for this, a letter went out to the patients. And because we couldn't actually identify who had what, it went out to every patient that had had a procedure. And it said, dear patient, there may be a problem with one of your implants, but don't worry. And in about 6 or 8 weeks' time, we'll get back to you and let you know whether you need to come in for us to investigate further or whether you're okay. And just put yourself in the patient's position for a minute. You get that letter, and basically you read the first bit, dear patient, and then you don't read any of the rest of it, and you see something that says there may be a problem with your implant. Now imagine that was a heart valve. And basically you don't read the please wait 6 or 8 weeks and it may not really be you. You just read you're going to die. And that's not a very good patient experience. So in the next chapter, Rachel will tell you how innovation in Hull overcame that problem. But I'm going to go on to my next and final slide and talk to you a little bit about the Scan for Safety program. Rachel's already talked about the timeline of 2014, 2016, when the demonstrator started. And Scan for Safety was a great name for something which was originally called GS1 and PEPAL Standards in Healthcare. Such a good ring about it. You want to be part of it, don't you? And then somebody else said, well, maybe what are we doing here? This is all about scanning for safety. And that kind of has taken off. And the great thing about that is there are now national Scan for Safety programs in Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland. And further afield, Scan for Safety programs exist in Ireland, Japan, Australia, Hungary, Denmark, and other countries, taking what was a England idea and bringing it to life. And in England, although we have made tremendous progress, as you know, our English trusts are all sovereign authorities, but Scan for Safety, the methodology behind it and the GS1 standards behind it are now major parts of existing and new policies, whether that be our new hospital program, which is building in locations and asset management using GS1 standards, whether it's our what's known as the medical devices outcomes registries, which in simple terms I'll describe. Again, Rachel talked about the Cumberledge report, and one of the recommendations for the Cumberledge report was to have a national register of implants. This is one of the things when you're not part of the NHS, you think, but surely we did that already. No, we didn't, and we're starting now. And that will be absolutely the best quality data is coming from the Scan for Safety science and indeed GS1 standards. Medicines administration, there's a move to closing the loop to avoid the massive errors in medical administration. Scan for Safety GS1 standards are behind that. National patient identification, again, wherever you are, you don't have to rely on medical record numbers, individual hospital numbers, EPIC numbers, Cerner numbers. You work on the NHS number, which goes across the whole 4 nations, powered by GS1 UK and part of Scan for Safety. That will come very soon. Inventory management systems, as Rachel has described. There's now a national product information master under development using GS1 standards so that we know what products are the right products and what they have in them, and are they right and fit for purpose, and are they interchangeable. And all this is actually overarched by NHS England's commercial strategic framework, which says, actually, let's do things in a standardized way, and let's do things to improve efficiency and patient safety by doing the right thing, doing it correctly first, which if you get it right first time, it saves an awful lot of money. So that's the bit behind GS1 standards and Scan for Safety as our little interlude of Beauty and the Beast. And I shall now hand back to Rachel.
Thanks, Glenn. Thank you. And Glenn's absolutely on the money here. Without a set of core standards, of core principles, actually, we would really struggle to do this program. So yeah, that leads us on to chapter 4. Oh no, we've got a major product recall. There's bumps in the road of the fairy tale. Here we go. So we received we received product recalls for all kinds of reasons. We get them because sometimes the packaging is wrong, and it says the wrong dosage, or it says the wrong size, or it says left and it's right, etc. Sometimes it's because actually they haven't been properly quality checked and they actually don't know if they're okay or they're not. And so it's a recall by the supplier for that reason. And sometimes it's because actually it's found to be malfunctioning as a product, and therefore it has to be recalled. So without the Scan for Safety system, we would have had to go back to those manual files, start looking for things, and not be able to do any of that. But we don't. What we now do is we have a real process in place. So we quarantine the stock, we add flags to the system. So even if we get one now, a bit like what Glenn says, going back to the horse meat scandal, if you picked up those products back in 2013 and took them to the till, by the time you'd done that, Tesco had already put on a warning saying, do not sell this product to any customers going forward. Well, ours does the same. So now if we get a product recall on a hip, and that hip procedure was started 4 minutes ago, and they pass over the right hip, in 9 minutes time, when they come to scan it, it will say this item has an active recall alert, very much like the screen that you're looking at here, and it says do not use this. And you can override it if it's life and limb, of course, and it's the last one left, we may choose to do so. If we're going to save a patient's life, we will probably make that clinical decision, and that will be made by the chief consultant in the room. But more often than not, we have more product on the shelf and we can go and get a different one. So that's the message that you get. And we had lots of different ones. We've had lots of them over the years, but one in particular that we had was around sutures. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit more on the next slide about that, if I can, Lorna, please. Thank you. So we got a product recall on sutures, and sutures, for those who are non-medical, are sort of little, if you imagine sort of a little needle that generally has got a pre-loaded little, I suppose best way to describe it is a little bit like a piece of cotton. It's not cotton, it's usually a plastic or a metal sort of binding that brings together muscle and tissue to actually seal up and close patients. So we got a product recall for sutures. Now, in the old days, if we'd have got a product recall for sutures, we wouldn't have been able to do anything about it because we didn't recall and didn't sort of track the actual sutures. We only recalled and put down the stickers for the implants because sutures don't come with a sticker on them, and we didn't make a note of any what we call consumables. We only made a note of the implantables. So basically, prior to this, we would have had no way of knowing which patient had been affected. However, with Scan for Safety, we have a system internally where we scan, we call it every glove, every gown. So everything that's used, it doesn't matter whether it costs 2p, 5p, £4,000, it doesn't make any difference, scan it every time. So as a result of that, we were the only hospital in England that could actually have some certainty about knowing that we had managed to extract all the sutures out, and we had 5 patients that were affected. There were 601 products, and from our time and motion studies, we know that every time you get a product recall, every variant takes an hour roughly to look through your implant books. So there were 601 hours that were saved by doing it this way. That's a massive benefit, absolutely huge. But apart from anything else, it means that we also have some certainty. So there's no chance of litigation because we've already done our duty of candor to our 5 patients and said, you have been affected. We've reviewed them clinically and talked to them about any remedial action that may be needed. In this case, none was, but we can actually have that conversation with them very early doors. So yeah, next slide, please. So yeah, and we're going to talk now back and find out what actually happens when we tell a clinician that there's products that have been recalled, and there's a little video. Thanks, Lorna.
For what we used to have to do if a product was recalled, we'd have to go back through patients' notes manually, and it was found that that was taking about an hour per patient. An example from last January, there was some sutures that was recalled, and there was 601 sutures we'd used. So previously that would have taken, at least 601 hours. We did this in an hour using the system, just, put in the serial number, the product number of the suture, and it told us everything we needed to know. So it's so valuable.
With the handheld device, we know that an asset is on ward 11, CT. We can type in what we're looking for on this mobile device, and we can actually scan the room, and it will beep and let us know where that device is to the exact pinpoint location.
Great, thank you. So chapter 5, our dreams of improvement. Once we've sort of cracked the scan for safety piece, and we knew that we were scanning well, and we were scanning at that point, we'd done over 1 million scans of products that had been passed to patients. So we were well on our way to being very compliant in most of our areas. And although we're still ongoing with that program, because it's a huge program, and you know, we've got 58 theatres here at Hull, so it's a big place, and there's a lot of pathways. I've worked out there's 126 pathways. So but we are approaching over halfway of those pathways now. So we know that we need to do that. And then I always want to look forward. What else can we do? What other things can we improve on? And one of the things that I really wanted to do then was I wanted to understand, people then said, yes, but now I'm looking for ... And it was always pieces of equipment. It was always an asset. And we were like, oh, right, okay. And then, but we thought, well, but that's no good, because if somebody takes that asset from a corridor overnight onto a ward, how would you know? You can't scan it at that point. How would you know? And then I went and spoke to various suppliers, and we came across the RFID solution, which is obviously used very heavily in retail. And basically, we determined that actually this is the way to do it. So what we did, I said, okay, let's look at all the assets, and we had a huge scope for this, a really big scope. But yeah, so we had 72,000 assets, around 17,000 sterile trays, of which about 3,000 a week roughly get re-washed and sterilised. We had 69 buildings to cover. It was a massive undertaking, and one of the very big things was around the actual cabling of the readers. So we fit nearly 1,000 readers and antennas into roof spaces, and we used almost sort of 12 kilometers of cabling when we did that. Huge undertaking. It took 5 months of 3 engineers' time to actually come and do that across all our hospital. After we'd done all of this, it became quite clear that lots of other trusts wanted to do it, but were doing it on a really, really small scale, or just had genuine interest. They would like to do it, but weren't doing it currently. I spoke to NHS England about it, and we were actually awarded a very prestigious, it's called a Global Digital Exemplar, or a GDE. And what that is, it's like a set of rules. So within the current library of exemplars that they have, there are 202 for running different hospital parts. So there's bed management, there's patient flow, there's drug management, there's public board meeting management, etc. And it goes on and on. It's everything about running a hospital. And we were the first hospital to be awarded one for RFID and the implementation from planning to actual deployment within Hull. So extremely proud to be given that. And what that now means is that sits on the NHS Futures website, where other hospitals can download it. It contains templates and project plans and key learning points and things that we did and evidence that we provided, so that people can learn from it, so that they don't have to start from scratch if they were thinking about, you know, implementing RFID in any large scale. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we did have our challenges with RFID, I'll be really honest. We had a lot of challenges, more so than what I really expected, being truthful. Data quality, right. So we asked 3 different areas. We asked finance, we asked clinical engineering, and we also asked the equipment library. How many assets did we have? And unfortunately, we got 3 different answers because they all had different things. Finance said, but we've paid for these. Okay. Clinical engineering said, but we've serviced these, right? And finally, medical kind of, you know, the equipment library, the medical equipment library said, yes, but we've stored these. So all the numbers were different. And also we realised that language becomes really important as well. So when we look at certain things, if you are in the UK, when we talk about tagging things, it's not very complimentary if you're being tagged. Whereas if we say we're going to label something, people don't have an issue with that. So we changed the language and we softened it. Within industry, they call the actual handsets that we use, which are like a standalone RFID reader, they call them guns. And I could almost imagine on the ICU corridor where we first implemented this, you know, kind of Sheila kind of, you know, shouting out down the corridor to Marjorie, Marjorie, have you got the gun? You know, and the patient sitting there thinking, what do they need a gun for outside ICU? So we changed the language and we used the words wand, because what happened when we first got them, one of the clinicians said, this is like magic, because we went into a sterile tray area and we asked them to find a specific sterile tray, and they don't usually go into those areas, so they didn't have a clue what they were looking at. And he said, it's just magic, innit? You can just pop this into the actual thing. You can go and find it. Brilliant. And we said, yeah. So we had to change some of the language. And also labels. In the hospital, we intensely clean labels, you know, and we use really quite severe chemicals to make sure that we're killing some of the superbugs, and some of the rooms are immaculately cleaned afterwards, depending on obviously the requirement. But as a general rule, assets get wiped down at least once a day in most cases. And sometimes, you know, up to sort of 20 times a day was the worst one that we saw. So we needed labels that wouldn't peel, etc., and would withstand the cleaning regimes. And being truthful, when we first got our initial label batch for testing, they weren't up to speed. But we did work with Zebra to actually make sure that we could get labels that work quite well. Next slide, please. So yeah, finding our assets in a timely manner. What we actually did when we went to look for everything, I had a small team that went to find all the assets, because there was 72,000 to find. And eventually what we recognised was that actually originally we had a standalone printer in a room, and they would take a notepad and pen and come to your ward and say, how many assets have you got and what are they? They'd make a list on a piece of notepaper, go back to the printer in the room and go and print them out, and then go back to find them. The problem with that is that during that time, assets would move. So they had a list of, I don't know, 18 assets for a room, and then when they come back to them, there'd only be 14 there, because some of the staff had moved 4 of the assets. So what we then did was we actually created what's known as a trolley hub, and you can see it here, and it would perfectly portable across the entire hospital, and it printed out 2 variants of label. So in most cases this covered what we needed, and it just made sure that we actually could get around all the hospital areas very quickly, and we didn't miss anything that had moved. So if we come back to your, you know, the example that I gave, and actually you've got 18 assets in a room, we would literally print out the things, and if you say I'm taking this, we would say, where are you taking it to, or can we label it before you take it? So that actually we didn't miss anything, and it meant that all of the assets have been labelled. So yeah, that's a trolley hub in action. So yeah, next slide, please.
Before we implemented the RFID project at the hospital, equipment was going missing. We had no idea who had taken it, where it had gone. So it's like looking for a needle in a haystack. An example of it is when I was buying equipment for the robotics suite, I ordered a glidoscope, which was £17,000, the base unit, the monitor, the stand, everything. The monitor didn't get delivered, but the base and stand did. I ended up having to phone the company to find out the serial number of the monitor. I spent hours searching the theatres across at Castle Hill to no avail. I ended up getting a serial number for it from the company, contacting clinical engineering, and they informed me that that monitor for that glidoscope was actually being used in the intensive care unit over at Hull Royal Infirmary. Since then, we've been able to find where the last known location of an asset was. So when we've been out labelling, we can see that an asset's passed under a reader. We now know the last known location, and with the help of this device, we can type in here what we're looking for. We can find it to literally pinpoint location.
Great. So that was Sarah, the specialist nurse within my team that was talking about when she worked in theatres, and she couldn't find her gyroscope that she'd just bought brand new. So it happens, it does happen. We come on to chapter 6 as our happy ever after. And one of the very big things here is that ultimately Scan for Safety continues to deliver. There's absolutely no question in my mind about that. It means that we can look at full patient pathway records, we can compare them from one theatre to another, from one year to another, from one hospital to another if we wanted to. You know, if Leeds said, can we compare our data and what it looks like, how long of a duration, what it cost, how many staff you have in a room? The answer is yes, we can do all of that because we work on the GS1 standards for all the products and the assets, and we can actually compare and contrast that data really well. So so far we've saved over 6,100 clinical hours of time from not having to get involved with product recalls, which is 2.9 years of nursing time of a single nurse just doing nothing else and being paid just to look through implant books, which is crazy. We've got over 83,000 stock lines across 367 locations. So we have everything from really small storerooms to really big storerooms. I think orthopedics is now bigger than cardiac. They hold about £1.5 million worth of stock in a single room, so it's a lot. One of my proudest parts of Scan for Safety, though, is the fact that we've stopped the line. You may not be familiar with that phrase, but stop the line means that during live surgery, staff who pass something over say, oh, there's a problem here. Just wait a minute. Can I just stop? Just stop. There's a problem here. And we've done that on 17 occasions. So the majority of those have been product recalls, but there's also been 2 episodes where actually product has expired. And even though it's been manually checked, and sometimes product doesn't have an actual date on it, it just has a barcode, which is not good practice, but it is sometimes what happens. So if they scan the product and it is out of date and it only has a barcode that appears on the outer label, it will tell them. And that means that 17 patients haven't been impacted directly. And that for me is absolutely the reason why I get out of bed every morning and do the job. So, you know, there's loads of other things. We can report in live time. We've got great clinical engagement, and we can see that. But also, we will also see some other bits and pieces of what's coming. So we can have a look at that as well. So next slide, please, Lorna. This is my immediate team. They work really hard. I can't do this without them. There's no doubt about it. Yes, it's my vision. And yes, I'm constantly striving. Everybody knows I'm always on to the next thing. I am like, you know, on to the next shiny thing and let's go and do more and have more. But actually it takes a team. And this is my team. Very proud of them. Thank you. Next slide, please.
The last 2 years, massive learning curve. So I've gone from knowing absolutely nothing about RFID to knowing quite a bit about RFID, how the technology works, learning about coding. It's been so interesting.
Yeah, for anybody that's thinking about you know, introducing the system, absolutely do it. It is daunting at first. For me, it was a very different way of working, but as long as you get good training, you know, you get the support from the Scan for Safety team, absolutely, you know, we should use this.
Always makes me really very proud when I see that video, and everybody always asks me if that is a real castle, and yes it is. So that is the castle at Castle Hill. So what's next before we wrap up? The Scan for Safety programme for me, I always start by asking the question to the clinicians about what are you trying to solve? What's the problem that we're trying to actually achieve? And one of the most recent answers to that was around I was talking to an ED consultant, an emergency department consultant, who said to me, we have a real problem with timings for prescribing certain drugs to intracerebral hemorrhage patients, which are known as stroke patients. And I said, okay, how does that work? Talk to me about it. And ultimately, it's because the drugs that are used are stored in a building which is about 900 meters away, which doesn't sound a lot. But actually, the reason it's stored 900 meters away is that ED have no way of actually processing a batch and a lot and a serial against that, because they often prescribe 3 or 4 packets of these depending on need, on patient requirement, height, weight, etc. So they have mixed products, so several batches held at any one time. And pharmacy said we can't do that because they have no way of saying what they've taken, and therefore we don't know which has gone to what patient. And these need to be tracked. So I said, what happens if we could scan them at the end in ED? If we put up a controlled drugs cabinet and they scanned them out at that point, and I showed them the system and I talked to them about we could scan the exact drugs to the patient in exactly the way that we do now, but it would obviously also give any product recalls in lifetime. Pharmacy were delighted and gave it their green tick of approval. The ED consultant is delighted, and within the next couple of weeks that goes live. So that means that our patients don't have a delay, and that delay will definitely make a difference to a patient's outcome, because the speed at which the drugs are given directly impacts the patient's recovery and the length of time that they spend in hospital and the severity to which they are affected. So that for me is an absolute win on a patient pathway, and that's why if we'd have just stuck to theatres, we'd have never had that opportunity to do that. So for me, these are the things that where we're going to go next. We're going to look at patient pathways that deliver significant patient benefits, but you can't do any of this without barcodes, because if there weren't a barcode on the box, I would have no traceability. Barcodes absolutely bring benefits, and they've got to be there, and we need them as standardized products. So yes, thank you. Thanks ever so much for listening. I think the next slide is some questions, but thank you.
Brilliant. Well, thank you. That was an incredible story. Thank you so much for sharing it with us all. Before we had the questions, I just wanted to launch a very quick poll. If you can just have a look at that. Very simple, really. I want to know if you'd like to get somebody to contact you directly. If there's anything that Rachel's spoken about, or Glenn, and you want someone to contact you directly, then just please do fill this in and we can follow up after the webinar. So now we do have some questions. There's still time to add questions to the question box. But yeah, the first one I'll pass to Rachel from William Butler, who said, thank you very much for sharing your experiences and insights. When items the patient caregiver are scanned, is the location of the item also registered or logged to sub-meter accuracy?
Yeah, and it's a cracking question. Thanks for that, William. Yes, they are. So every item, when it's receipted, is actually logged into a sub-location. So if you've got 3 valve rooms, for example, within cardiac, which we do, it would say valve room 1, and you can actually go to the extremity of saying valve room 1 top shelf, valve room 1 bottom shelf. You know, you can do that. So yes, you absolutely do. And you've got to know that, because otherwise you would never know whether or not it's compatible, because you match your products to your procedures, to your places, to your clinicians. Believe it or not, we thread all of them through, so that you don't see, for example, if you're a thoracic surgeon that does lungs, you won't see any hip procedures, because you don't need to. So yes, absolutely, it is all linked. Yes.
Brilliant. One for Glenn. Who else is doing this?
Who else is doing this? Well, I think if we look at scanning at point of care in particular, I mean, there are multiple new use cases, but scanning in point of care now is in England is now above 50%, which is fantastic news. And as I mentioned earlier, there are national rollout programmes underway in Wales and Scotland. They're multi-year programmes. Scotland have already commenced implementation of point-of-care scanning in 4 of their 14 health boards, for example. So it's underway, and although the programme's been going for a while, actually adoption is accelerating over these last sort of 6 to 9 months, and a lot of that has to do with all those peripheral things that I discussed at my sort of closing slide.
Brilliant. So Rachel, what are your top 3 key learnings from this exercise?
Yeah, I think one of the things is around the data, is around understanding. We make assumptions that the data that we're going to get from the products are going to be clean and correct. We make assumptions that the product data is actually going to be correct, but we also make assumptions that the locations, for example, are called certain things. So we've got a building which previously belonged to it didn't belong to our site, and it's right on the edge of the site, and it was known as the Centenary Hospital. And when we eventually bought that site, even though it's got a new name, actually everybody calls it the Centenary Building. So when people are looking for it, we had to put the Centenary Building, even though that's not its official name, but also the actual name that it has on all our maps and all our locations. So I would always test the assumptions and ask local for local knowledge. What's this building called? What are these assets called? What's this room called, etc. That's massive in terms of doing that. So the data is the big point. The other one is to actually walk the patient pathway to understand it. I would absolutely do that every single time to understand it, and physically go and walk it. Go down the corridor. So you walk down here, yeah, and then we have to go to, because if you don't, we would have never realised that actually, for example, the drugs that we're talking about in ED actually take that long to get. So when we did it and realised it took 14 minutes to walk there, get the drugs out, sign them out, get them, and then pull back, 14 minutes it took. And we would have never known that if they'd have just said, oh, we go and get the drugs from the cupboard, and you didn't walk it. So you need to kind of put yourself in their shoes to understand it. And thirdly, my biggest learning really was that actually, if you ask for help in a hospital, you will get it. So ask the clinicians to help you. By helping them, they will help you.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Got one from Peter. Can the device generate barcodes?
Yes, it can generate barcodes. So yes, if products come in and they don't have, we still get a lot of plasticware, unfortunately, that don't have GS1 standard barcodes on them, or any barcodes sometimes. So yes, the product can generate barcodes, absolutely. It doesn't have specific lot and batch, because as a general rule, anything which is uniquely device, kind of recognised, has its own GS1 standard, and we've yet to find one that hasn't. But for things like plasticware, like I said, a lot of jugs and bowls and those kind of things, a lot of them come in still with no barcode on. So yes, the system can generate a barcode for you to scan, yes.
I've got a brilliant one here from Chris Florey, which I think I'm going to answer this one. Who kissed the frog and what did they turn into?
I think there's a couple of answers there, isn't there? but
let me say my one first, because I think the frog in this story was the manual asset tracking system, and that was kissed by the Scam Safety team and turned into this beautiful new solution. But Rachel, what do you think?
Yeah, and Glenn will laugh at this because he knows him, but I think Lee kissed the frog, really, and then he turned into kind of my fairy godmother, really, complete with pumpkin carriage, because that's the guy that actually funds all my budgets every year, and has done so for 6 years now. So yes, I think he absolutely did that and got the shock of his life, I think, Chris.
Brilliant, I love that one. Okay, so I think we're almost at the hour, and that's all we've got time for today. I'd just like to thank everybody for attending, and especially thank Rachel and Glenn for giving us their extremely valuable time to share their stories. I'll get this uploaded and shared. You can still use the registration link to listen to this on demand, but please have a brilliant rest of the day, and goodbye for now. Thank you, everybody.